How do I know she was a witch? She turned me into a newt. I got better. All right. Really bad Monty Python impersonation. But we're going to talk about newts briefly as we get started. This is The Real Story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian,
And I'm Sherry Hutchens.
and this is where two broker associates talk about all things real estate. Hey, Sherry.
Did you say newts?
Newt. Like,
Newt?
yeah, like a salamander. Have you not seen Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail?
I dated somebody once who was obsessed with it, and I might have been in the same room when he watched it 5,000 times.
Well, if you're going to watch it once, you're going to watch it 5,000. I was
Okay.
One time I was working for this nonprofit organization in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and somebody donated them like 100 acres in the hills above Salinas, which they couldn't use, but it was donated because there was like some newt or salamander or lizard that only in the whole world existed there, and so they weren't allowed to develop it. And somebody joked that they should rename that salamander the Mount Herman salamander or newt or whatever it was.
I'm rolling my eyes while I'm laughing at that story.
Yeah. Well, I bring it up because there's a big thing in the news that we're going to talk about before we get to our big topic today, which is Californian Governor Gavin Newsom signed into law a budgetary bill, which is going to allow development in infill to happen faster. Which you're kind of like, of course, that seems like a no-brainer.
Can
But
you
there,
explain what an infill is?
Okay, so a city gets developed in a certain pattern. People buy
Mhm.
up lots and develop them. And in the process, the big tracts cover a lot of land, but when they're spec homes, there'll be a lot that might be in the middle of a otherwise developed area that's
Mhm.
vacant and could be built on. Or maybe there was an older home that essentially has been condemned and the lot could be developed either as another single family home or multifamily,
Okay.
as opposed to building farther out in the Central Valley where they could build, 100 homes over a big area
Or 1,000.
or a
Yeah.
thousand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
At the
and
risk of losing our farmers, which I have opinions about.
well, yeah, you almost grew up on a farm.
Well, I visited a farm that belonged to my grandparents. I didn't exactly grow up on it.
Well, whatever.
But I'm
Well,
a jam maker. I like to go out to the Central Valley and pick fruit and bring it home and make jam. And as the farmers' kids are saying, I don't want to work in such a hard business, and they sell the family land off to developer where they build thousands of homes.
yeah. And there's a balance there because we have had a housing shortage in California as long as I can remember, which is
Mhm.
part of our, equation, supply and demand. Um, and so there's been over the years, the state's been trying to make it easier for these infill properties to be developed. And actually, on the same category, that's why the state passed a law that local municipalities and counties cannot restrict ADU development as
Right,
another way to increase housing.
right.
Well, are you familiar with the term NIMBY?
Not in my backyard.
Yes, and I think that we all have a little nimbiness going in our, we might like the idea of certain things as long as it's not across the street from us,
Right.
or literally in our backyard.
Yes.
And so the NIMBY crowd has been resisting these infill projects because essentially it's represents open space for them, or space around their properties, or they just don't like the density that's being required, being designed.
Yeah.
An example in local here in Lafayette is there's a project called the Terraces, which is right near Pleasant Hill Road and Highway 24 near Acalanes High School, that has been
Mhm.
in process of being developed for as long as I can remember, maybe
Yeah.
10, maybe 20 years.
Probably more like 20.
Yeah, and there's been a little bit of a NIMBY movement that says, yes, we should build housing in the county, but let's do it in Pittsburgh and Antioch and not in Lafayette so we can maintain our home values. And I'm a little empathetic around the home value, but also we just need more housing. Um, and one of the things that NIMBYs have been collectively using to stifle this development is CEQA. I know, getting politically insider. Do you know what CEQA stands for?
CEQA. I can't remember what it stands for, but I know
It,
the term.
yeah, it's the California Environmental Quality Act.
Okay.
And something like that. Do you have any idea about when that was enacted?
I actually don't know. Tell me.
So 1970. And want to know what
Oh, wow.
governor championed it and signed that?
Reagan.
Reagan.
Yes.
So this is what's so bizarre about our country and the cycle of politics. Reagan signed the CEQA. You want to know who established this, the EPA at the federal level, the Environmental Protection? Uh,
Nixon was, or
Nixon.
yeah, Nixon. Yeah.
I mean, these are like the Republican of Republicans of our childhood and young adulthood who were for the economy. And it's not a
Yeah.
surprise that both of them were from California,
For
where,
the environment.
yeah,
And,
it's not a surprise
um,
because California, one of our best assets is the incredible beauty we have from the coastline to the
yeah.
Sierras to even farming in the Central Valley.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so it's just kind of ironic that the champions, political party wise, have shifted on that. Uh,
It is strange that those were both conservative Republican presidents who, as you said, championed those causes. I mean, one of my favorite places in the world to visit is Sea Ranch, which is an 11-mile long development up on the North Coast, just below uh,
Oregon.
Mendocino. Well, kind of Oregon, yes, actually. Not quite that far, but and I think that it was finally approved. I want to say early 70s. I can't remember the exact year. It would never be built today because of the environmentalists.
Yeah.
And I'm not judging environmentalists. So
Right, right, right. Just that's just the
not
nature of it. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
exactly.
no
So,
pun intended.
but we have a housing shortage.
Yeah. And so NIMBYs have been using CEQA, the Environmental Protection Act, to slow down development, maybe rightfully so,
Mhm.
but and sometimes just really for the sole purpose of I don't want to build this multi-housing. I don't want them to build this multi-housing project
Yeah,
like the terraces in Lafayette.
yeah,
So this law, that it's a budget law I don't know how, I'm not a policy wonk, but the net of it is that it's going to allow people to do fill-in projects with much less red tape to cut through, which you would think that the more conservative people among us would really celebrate that. Um, but ironically, the progressive movement likes to see more multifamily housing, make it more affordable, is also for it. So there's actually widespread support for something like this. I am sad to say that it seems like the impetus to get this across the goal line was the fire in Pacific Palisades,
yeah,
because all of those individual homeowners are all going through the permitting process to get their houses rebuilt. I
yeah.
mean, just think, I want to build exactly what's there. Well, you still have to get a building permit, and codes have changed, and you can't do exactly what was there. You have to do it till it meets today's
Bring it up
standards.
to code. Yeah.
So this act will, in the case of Pacific Palisades and other places who have suffered from fire damage, streamline that approval process, taking less money in the cost of rebuilding and make it a little bit easier for people to get their houses back.
And doesn't it somehow limit the NIMBYs from having an opinion on
Well,
certain
that's
things related to their neighbor's home?
yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that part of it. I know specifically they can't use CEQA as they're demanding some
Mhm.
environmental review. It's going to allow more. And there's some restrictions. It's not just like any project you want anywhere. It's
Mhm.
smaller projects, infill projects, limited to building height. If you
Yeah.
extend beyond some of those parameters, you still have to do the traditional treatment. But if you're going to build a single family home or a duplex, I think up to a fourplex, I'm not 100% sure. So interesting news.
Very
Um,
interesting news. I think this just happened last night, yesterday
last night,
afternoon.
yeah,
So it remains to be seen exactly how this is all going to play out. So stay tuned, everybody.
yeah. Well, I think
So
that's gonna take us into our topic du jour, which is talk a little bit about the market, inventory, median home sale price. Uh,
yeah,
So just kind of generically, how would you describe the current market we're in?
Unpredictable. I mean, not that you can ever predict what's going on with real estate anyway, but the last 5 years have been unlike anything that I've ever experienced in my almost 25 years in the business. And just when you think it's going to even out post-pandemic, I mean, it's 5 years since we went into shelter in place, and you'd think we'd be back into some sort of normal market, but I don't think there's anything normal
Yeah.
anymore. I'm starting to believe that we're just going to be on this roller coaster for who knows how long. So, yeah, unpredictable.
The I think we mentioned this last week, those of you who are listening to these back to back, we had a colleague say that it's a property by property
Mhm.
market.
Yeah.
But I do think that we're seeing a general shift where, 2 years ago, clearly a seller's market. Um, what are some, and then now it's kind of, we'll talk a little bit more about the market now, but for a seller's market, what are some characteristics of a seller's market and things that buyers and sellers can anticipate when it is a seller's market?
So I think a classic seller's market is when there are many more buyers than there are sellers, and uh, hopefully low interest rates to go along with that, but not always. Um, and buyers making offers without contingencies, which is never a good thing for a buyer, but a lot of them have been doing it over the last 5 years because they felt like that was the only way that they could get an offer accepted. Um, and sellers really being in control of how the house is presented, and how it's priced, and most of all, I guess it more than anything, rising prices.
Yeah.
So lack of inventory, lots of buyers.
And
Classic sellers market.
typically multiple offers on
Yeah.
houses. And I mean, I remember at one point, uh, not necessarily in the current cycle, but a previous cycle, we would go show a house on a Sunday, maybe even go to the open house, and the buyer would be so excited about it, we would skip the rest of the tour and go home and write an offer and get it into the agent's hot little hands even
And
before they
hope that it
left the
wasn't
open.
sold by the time we got it in,
Yeah,
delivered.
yeah, and it's kind of crazy about the kind of risks that buyers had to take. Like,
Mhm.
here's all my money. I'll name my firstborn child after you. You could stay in the house for free for as long as you want.
Yeah, yeah,
In fact, we have a client right now who got a 2-year rent back.
yeah.
A 2-year rent
Two
back.
years.
Just crazy.
Yeah, that's called a lease, not a
Yeah.
rent.
Yeah. That he's not staying there for free as far as I know. But
No, but tying into what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, the reason he can stay there for 2 years is because it's taking the new owner that long to get the permits for the house she wants to build on that property.
yeah, yeah,
2 years.
yeah. I I didn't really fully appreciate what was going on there until he told me that it's, I think, less than 1,000 square feet and two bedrooms.
Yeah.
So yeah, that somebody's gonna on a large enough lot to have a bigger house. So
It's got foundation problems, so it needs to be knocked down apparently, and she
yeah,
just wants to build a bigger house. But 2 years, a 2 year went back for a 2 year permitting process.
yeah.
So
So okay, so that's a seller's market.
that is a seller's.
What are some hallmarks of a buyer's market, and what can buyers and sellers anticipate?
It's been a while since we've been in a buyer's market. You and I were trying to figure that out this morning. When was the last time we felt like it was at least balanced, if not a full buyer's market? And that was before 2020, maybe 2018. Um, so a buyer's market is when there are more houses on the market than there are ready, willing, able buyers. And one of the things that we're experiencing now, which is also a hallmark of a buyer's market, is price reductions.
Boy,
Uh,
wasn't that the startling when we looked at those numbers today?
yes. Can you remember what those were exactly?
So we tracked 10 cities in central Contra Costa County, which is our primary market.
Mhm.
Alamo, Danville, Clayton, Concord, Lafayette, Martinez, Moraga, Orinda, Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill, Walnut Creek.
Yes.
Did I get them all?
I think think you did. Arinda Martinez. I think you got them all.
Yeah. Um, the
And almost alphabetical.
well, yeah, that's how I had to remember it, how they were put in.
Yes. Did you say
Um,
Danville? Anyway.
so in those 10 cities, just
Mhm,
looking at single family homes, we start dipping into condos and townhouses and the data kind of shifts a little bit. So we just stayed with single family homes.
mhm.
And there's something like 668 active listings for
Yep.
single family homes.
Yep.
And more than a third of those have had price reductions. I think it was 258. Two, is that right? Is that what you remember?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, 258 over the last 30 days.
over the last 30 days. Yeah. And boy, I mean, more than a third of the houses, which means that sellers and their agents are struggling with pricing homes
Mhm,
accurately.
mhm,
And it used to be 18 months, 24 months ago, if your neighbor sold their house for 1 million, you were listing your house at 1,050,000.
mhm.
And now, if your neighbor sold their house for 1 million, you probably should be listing it at 950 or 975.
Yeah.
It might get bid back up to 1 million, or you might just sell it. But if you list it at 1,050,000, it's going to set. Buyers are like, unless there's
Yeah.
something really special about it. When I say your
Yeah.
neighbor's house, I mean an
Yeah.
exact comp. Your buyers are like, yeah, I'm not going to overbid for that. They
Yeah.
mentally they want a bargain. They probably could spend 1,050,000 on it, but they're like, I don't want to.
Let me give you a really classic example of what kind of market we're in. We showed a house on Saturday in Walnut Creek in Northgate that was priced, I think, at 1.6. I'm gonna
7.5.
7.5. And it went pending, and all of a sudden it came back on the market because the buyer walked. We don't know why, but the contract fell apart, came back on the market. It had been priced at 1.675. It came back on the market at
2.5.
1.725, $50,000 more. And so we can assume that that's what it was in contract for. Although, um, when we showed it to our clients, they liked it. And a couple days later, they reached out and said, "We like that house. We don't think it's worth 1.725, and we really don't think it's worth 1.675." And this is a little outrageous, but this is what they said. Do you think the seller would take 1.5 all cash? That's the kind of market we're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah. For the record, I don't think we're going to write that offer because,
Exactly.
yeah,
Because the seller is not there yet. The
yeah,
seller might get there at some point, but they are not there yet.
yeah,
But that is how buyers are thinking, and sellers are way out somewhere else thinking a completely different thing. So we've got two extremes, and our job is to find a way to get them together.
yeah. Well, I think that the things that are keeping buyers, so in a buyer's market, it's interesting. Interest rates play a dual-edged sword. So we think about in a seller's market, interest rates are low, meaning buyers have a lot of power because they can get cheap money. But a buyer's market isn't necessarily marked by high interest rates, because of course that limits their capacity.
Yeah.
But it does lower what they can afford to buy, and so it drives down housing prices. So the
Mhm.
same, say the monthly budget, housing budget for a buyer is 5,000. When the interest rate goes up, they can afford less purchase price. And so in that aspect, the price is going down, but the buyer isn't really getting a bargain because their monthly
Mhm.
budget is the same.
Mhm.
So a cash buyer, that's why they're trying to take advantage of it because they realize they're competing against somebody who is going to have to spend more on that interest rate, the higher the price. And
Mhm.
so they're willing to go a little bit lower. I think that there's also a temptation for some buyers to to just be hesitant. They're like, I don't want to take a big risk, and
Mhm.
I don't have a driving factor to do it. It's not like the
Mhm.
pandemic where I'm stuck in my house and I want to, or my apartment in the city, and I want to have a backyard.
Yeah.
There isn't a burning desire for buyers right now. I mean, we have the typical or the natural life cycles. So marriages, births, expanding family, older kids, you start thinking about schools. But unless there's really a compelling reason, buyers are, eh, I'll wait.
Yes, we went through that when the interest rates started to rise in 2023. I think there were seven interest rate hikes that year. And then we went from the twos into the sevens.
Yeah.
And we saw people sit back and just say, I don't think I'm going to buy a house at these prices at 7%. But you and I jokingly and apologize in advance to people who this may offend, said that we were in the death, divorce, and dementia business. The only people that we were selling houses for were people who had passed away or people who were getting a divorce. We had several of them in the last few years. I don't think we'd had any well, for a long time before that, or people who could no longer stay in their homes and were going into assisted living for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So, but everybody else was staying put. It's like
Yeah.
we're not moving in this. And a lot of the people who were staying put were the ones who had the 2% interest rates. It's like,
Yeah.
why would they move? They bought at the top of the market and they weren't upset about it because their interest rate was 2.5%. So,
Yeah.
um,
We were looking at an article. Well, I was looking at two things. One is Bay Area median prices. So even when we start talking about it being a buyer's market, we haven't really seen a significant decrease in values in the Bay Area.
correct.
And so we've got places like Santa Clara County and San Mateo County where the median sales price is over 2 million.
Yeah. Yes.
And the median sales price in San Francisco is approaching 2 million. Alameda County, I think it's 1.6. But what's
Median.
interesting in Contra Costa County, the median price in Contra Costa County is 900,000. So Contra Costa County is the bargain of the Bay Area. That's actually not true. Solano County is probably the least expensive. I don't have that
Yeah.
number at my fingertips, but Contra Costa continues to be a place where people are more likely to be able to afford a house than
Yeah.
some of the other zip codes.
Yeah, if your intention is to commute to San Francisco on public transportation such as BART, Contra Costa County is the most affordable place. Solano County doesn't have BART,
No.
so that's a different situation.
They got
Uh,
a ferry though,
they do have a ferry. That's true. If you want to, yes, yes.
out there
So,
by the Cal Maritime. Did you know that this is a complete side note that Cal Poly has taken over the management of the Cal Maritime accounting? It's going to be Cal some version of Cal Poly,
no, I
specifically
didn't know.
Cal Poly Slow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
No, did not know that.
Cal Poly has been expanding their name within the California state system. So, you've got traditionally you had SLO, and then Pomona came along at some point. And then in the last like 5 years, Humboldt changed their name to Cal Poly Humboldt as they begin to become more tech and engineer focused. And
Huh.
then this kind of expansion into the Cal Maritime. So,
Interesting
yeah,
trivia.
I know, completely unrelated to housing. Uh,
So median sales prices. So we're at the 2 million mark in a lot of the Western counties, San Francisco, Santa Clara, San Mateo, heavy influence of technology businesses over on that side. They can afford more house than most people. But then us at 900,000. So what is the median sales price in the United States?
So this is really interesting. 400,000
Yeah.
is the median sales
Yeah.
price. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is just crazy to think about that. That the cheapest county in the Bay Area is twice the national average.
More than twice. Yep.
Yeah. We were looking at the on a Redfin article, the 10 buyer or seller, no, buyer
10 best buyers markets.
buyers markets. Yeah. Wasn't that an interesting list? You want to tell everybody what state dominated that?
Florida.
Yeah. I think like of the top 10, 6 or 7 of them were from
We're
Florida.
all in Florida, yeah. They were all in what Redfin was calling the Sun Belt. Las Vegas was on there, Austin, Texas was on there, and lots of
I
Florida.
think there was an Arizona.
There was in Arizona as well.
Yeah.
So I looked at it and I mean, it was in, the high 90s last week when we were out showing houses on Saturday. And I look at those cities and it's like, no wonder they're a buyer's market. There's no way I am moving to any of those cities and putting up with the heat they've got. So,
Well, I think the other thing that's interesting, so those of us here in California, we've been dealing with fire insurance and all of that phenomenon. Florida is doing the same thing with
yeah,
hurricane. All the
hurricanes.
insurers, all the ways that we lamented about how they're pulling out of California, it's happening in Florida too.
Yeah.
So all the advantages of not having to pay income tax in Florida is the being blown away by the hurricane. I guess maybe some future Alexander Hamilton is being created as we speak. Right? Isn't that how he left the Dominican Republic or wherever because of the hurricane? Is it
Was it
the
the DR?
hurricane came? All right,
Sing it.
never. No, that
I
sorry,
think.
everybody, not going to happen. All right. So, but the okay, so let's talk about the seller friendly. That was an interesting list too. I don't remember that quite as well, but do you remember the seller? What communities are the most seller?
They were
They're
there were
like
a couple in New Jersey, one in New York, upstate New York, one in Ohio,
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island.
I think there was
Nothing
one
in California. Nothing in
nothing
California.
in California. It was very silent on California, which was
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, we're a microcosm out here. There's just no place like it when it
Yeah.
comes to housing prices. And I know people who live in other parts of the country just cannot believe what we pay for housing.
The are you familiar with the Hunger Games?
I saw the first one.
Okay. So for those of you familiar with the Hunger Games, it's post-apocalyptic dystopian story, and they've divided everybody up into districts, and each district has its own industry. But District 1 and 2 are this kind of grotesque version of humanity, and they leech off of everybody else. And I'll use that word leech off of, but
That sounds familiar.
yeah, they have they wear weird makeup and clothing, and they will eat food that they'll just not desire highly, but then they'll force themselves to throw up so they can eat even more and just over and abundant. And so 1 and 2 are just kind of like just a weird morphation of humanity. And I feel like the Bay Area is like District 1 and 2. The housing market here is just grotesque and
Yeah.
just it's hard to navigate. I don't want to say you have to be fake. I don't mean it that way, but to just give you an example, you know how people can afford these communities that are the average price is 2 million. It's not just the tech salary, but it's all the tech stock that they're getting that they're then cashing out for the down payment.
Yeah.
Because the cost of if you're going to put 20% down on a $2 million house, that's 400,000 K. It takes people a long time to save that much money. So the stock option, but then you have a mortgage at 1.6, which means that you have, a $10,000 a month payment. So you've got to be making 120,000 just to pay your mortgage, let alone property tax. And
And
it's
about $25,000 a year in property taxes on top of that.
and it's just this grotesque existence. And so um going back to our title, conversation about the NIMBY laws, like if when there's more housing, then these prices will be mitigated because you won't be forced to, if you want to live within a half hour where you live, you won't have to spend 2 million on a house. You'll be able to there'll be more housing available, and it'll bring those prices back down so that people who have regular jobs, who live in districts 3 through 10, who they have good paying jobs, these are still white collar jobs, just be able to buy a normal house,
Yeah.
3 beds, 2 baths, room for a dog, park your car maybe in your garage, but at least on a driveway.
If you're lucky enough to have a garage.
Yeah. I was
You
working with
know,
Go ahead.
sorry, I interrupted you. I wanted
Oh, I was
go.
just gonna say, I was working with a couple yesterday that you haven't met yet, and it was a tale of 2 cars. They only had one off-street parking spot, and so one of their cars was this cheap beater that had no hubcaps, and the other one was a brand new BMW 5 plug-in hybrid. And it's like, well, yeah, we only can park one car off the street. So the other one, we don't know what's going to happen to. So we don't invest any money into it.
Yeah. That's what happened to the hubcaps, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you remember that time that we were showing houses to a couple? They had been looking for a really long time in a specific area. And this was very telling about that age group and that um, income level. He said, Sherry, I don't really care how much the house costs as long as my payment, including property taxes, isn't higher than 28,000 per month. 28, can you imagine writing a check for 28,000 for
Housing budget.
your housing budget every month?
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just one of the most interesting things I've heard while I've been selling real estate.
Yeah. And he was an unassuming person.
Yeah, very
There
unassuming.
wasn't anything about him that made you think, yeah, that's what I mean by District 1.
Yes, yeah,
Distorted. That's the word I was searching for a moment.
yeah,
Just a
yeah,
distorted reality around property and housing. So
yeah.
I like Dave Ramsey's recommendations on a lot of things, but his idea of buying with a 15-year mortgage or with cash just doesn't work in the Bay Area. And he would say, well, then don't live there. It's like, well, okay, but this is where my family is. You want me to go move away from everybody I know? And
Yeah. And it's
it,
where your career is. It's not like you can take a real estate career and just move to another city.
exactly.
Your
Yeah.
spirit's here. So
No.
yeah, he's a little off base on that one. I think he's got a lot of good advice, but he,
Yeah. Yeah.
he would never live in California. So
Paying for vacation with your credit card is a stupid idea. You don't have, if you don't have, yeah, then you do it, go camping, or something else.
you know, it was 105 in Paris today.
Yikes.
They
That was
closed
a
the Eiffel Tower. Did they think it was going to melt or what's the deal? I don't
that
get
was
it.
a huge non sequitur from camping to the Eiffel Tower
Well, you were talking about don't go on vacation
on your credit
anywhere
card.
with a credit card, and I thought I'm not going on vacation in the summertime in July when it's 105 in Paris. There's no
Well,
way.
you should take our client Jillian and have her give you a tour of Iceland.
And well, you can yes, and you can always put more clothes on. There's a limit to how many you can take off. So
Yeah.
Iceland right up my yeah yes.
All right.
Anyway, so buyer's market, seller's market, price reductions.
Yeah.
How do you
So
talk your client into reducing their sales price? We tried to
careful,
do that a couple weeks ago. It didn't work.
very carefully.
Yeah.
Um, so we had a listing in Rossmore, that probably was the longest marketing time frame that we've had in, I don't know, five or
Maybe
six
ever.
years. Yeah, certainly since before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what was hard is that I didn't believe we were overpriced.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is that usually we know that something's overpriced and we just have to convince our clients of it. But the market's is very clear when it speaks. Like, yeah, this is not, nobody wants it for the price you have it listed at.
It spoke. It shouted actually.
Yeah. And it was, and it kind of can go both ways. Like if people aren't even coming and looking at it, maybe there's some different marketing you can do. Maybe you can look at the photos you have. Do they really tell the right story?
Mhm.
But if people are coming and looking and not writing an offer, then you know you've got a problem because you've given everybody a fair look at it.
Mhm.
And so I think that first of all, we had to be humble, and I had to be humble. I think I was the one that was between the two of us was stuck on not wanting to reduce it. And
Mhm.
so had to be humble with our client and say, I thought that we had it priced right, but clearly the market hasn't. And I think that humility, that my kind of acknowledging that we weren't at the right spot, invited them into the conversation and
Mhm.
made us continue to keep us as partners in the conversation rather than us as agents trying to convince them that they needed to lower it because I was able to validate their home. Um, but then we said, yeah, we're not getting looks. No one's looking at it. And when people are looking, this is what they're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. You know that we always say the market will tell you if your price is wrong.
Yep.
And we usually use that in the context of if we price it too low, the market will correct it and it will sell for the price it's meant to sell for. Well, we're on the other side of that now. The market told us that house was too high, even though we priced it to comps. We just didn't take a dartboard and pick a price for that. We studied the comps and looked at what the competition, and in Rossmore, you have a lot of floor plans that are very, very similar. This was one of the most common, and we believed in that price.
Yep.
Uh, but we didn't get any showings and
Yep.
didn't get any showings and didn't get any showings and did a price reduction and got a few showings, but no offers. The market told us that price was not correct.
Yep. I think that as we look at things like number of homes that are on the market
Hmm.
and number of days on market. Oh, that was interesting from those national lists that we were looking at. The homes in Florida, for instance, were averaging well over 80 days.
Yeah,
Median, not average, median days on market over
yeah,
80.
yeah,
And the houses that were in the hot sellers market, supposedly, were still taking 20 to 25 days to sell.
yeah,
And so now bring us back to District 1 here in the Bay Area, where when we were hot, we were selling in 3 to 7 days.
hmm,
10 days still felt like a huge seller's market. But if it was on the market 17 days, that felt like you were stale and had to start talking price reduction after
yeah.
17 days.
13 days, yes. Yeah, it's
Um,
crazy.
and because of that being the context, buyers look at a house that's been on the market for 3 weeks and they're not going to write a full price offer. They're
Right?
right. And because everybody's like, what's wrong?
Yeah,
Even though you look across the country, average days on market is something like 45.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely District 1 here.
Yeah. So I think that so some of the things we would say is, yeah, it's been on I has it in the current market, I would not have a price conversation shorter than 21 days.
Hmm.
Um, with one caveat, if we came on the market and the reaction the first weekend was so severe, everybody was just like confused by that you were listing a $1 million house for 2 million, you might have the conversation immediately. But the but I don't think that in most places you would even think about a price reduction until 45 days.
Yeah, I think about people in the other parts of the country having to keep their house in showing condition for, 40, 50, 60, 70 days.
Yep.
That's a ton of work.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
So,
they don't.
or they don't. Maybe it's probably just different.
Yeah.
Here they're staged and stagers have a limit of 60 days because they know basically that at 60 days you're going to have an offer, you're going to close escrow, people will be moved out for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it remains to be seen what will happen as we go forward here.
It's interesting. There was I there's a house that we sold in Oakland, North Oakland, that I think was like the last one of the last transactions where things really started to go soft and move in the buyer's direction.
Hmm.
And the list price was well below two, and it sold for well over two.
Hmm.
And the house next door is for sale, and it's been on the market. Um, actually technically two different listings over that same time frame, and they started out much higher. Now, North Oakland is a weird marketing space around list price, but
Hmm.
they've had to do multiple price reductions and they're chasing the market down, and it's a bigger
Yes, yeah.
house. Yeah, it's a bigger house. And so based on our sales price, you would have thought that their original list price might have been close to its value.
Hmm.
But I think that two things happen. One, by overpricing, they missed their woo window of
Hmm.
opportunity.
Yeah,
And then the market has gone south on them, and there's
yeah.
almost no recovery at this point. It's been really kind of hard to watch, painful to watch.
Oh, yeah. Boy, our timing was really good on that because things slowed down in mid-ish April, and our spring market did not have time to complete to which is traditionally middle to end of May, and they got caught in that. There were a couple major mistakes that they made, and then a couple things that were just out of their control.
Like the tariffs.
Yes.
which
Yeah.
froze everybody for about 2 weeks.
Yeah. I was with a group of friends on Sunday and we were talking about tariffs and how the talk about tariffs when it started to happen in April brought a slowdown to our market. And the friends in my group said, well, are there tariffs on houses? I don't understand why it affected the market. And it's like, no, we don't have tariffs on actual houses, but it's the uncertainty that the market doesn't like. Any kind of uncertainty brings everybody to a halt, even though we all need a place to live and eventually people are going to get back into the market and buy a house, but it was enough to scare people off.
And yeah, just cause everyone to pucker.
Yep, yep.
So after all this discussion, how would you describe our current market? Would you say it's neutral, transitional?
We are definitely in a transitional market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how should buyers and sellers approach it? Should they, if you're pricing a home, let's take a seller's perspective. What would you tell a seller? What should they expect in preparing their house and pricing wise?
I think preparing the house is the same as you would in any market. And unless you're in a recession, well, like we were in 2008, then you don't do anything to the house except put a sign in the yard. But you prepare the house, and then the real estate agent's job is to present the facts and just show them the trends and what's going on. Not all sellers are going to be able to handle that. And I think that's why we're seeing price reductions because people are going in and pricing homes as if it's still 2022,
Mhm.
2021. And we're starting, and then they get a reality check and prices start to come down. So,
So you would suggest pricing it slightly below what you think the value is, just kind of mentally for the seller.
no, I think you need to price it to comps. I don't think you can price it below because if it sells below, I think this is one situation where the market doesn't necessarily correct it because buyers have the mindset of declining prices. So you've
Yeah.
got to be really careful with the way you price these homes. You've got to price them to comps, but I don't think sellers are ready to hear that yet.
So is your perception that buyers are not going to write an offer um, in the first marketing period below its list price, or is is that what you're saying? So like say we list a house, say we think that legitimately the market rate of a house is $1 million. Would you price it at 1 million or would you price it at 990?
It's property by property.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I probably, it depends on the house. There are some houses that are still selling for over, the majority are selling for under. So I
yeah,
think I'd be conservative, maybe 995.
yeah. All right. All right. So let's talk about buyers now. What
Hmm.
advice would you give a buyer? How would you write an offer on a house that came on the market this week or a house that's been on the market for 3 weeks?
I think that the way you handled the situation with our clients who wanted to really do a low bid on this house the other day with your 5% rule was really good advice. Do you want to talk about your 5% rule?
Sure. Yeah. So this is where we get into psychology, and maybe you're going to use this against us when you negotiate on our listing. But I perceive that there's nothing magic about it. It's just kind of a general amount of 5% is about as much as a seller can tolerate and still negotiate with you. And if it's more than that, they're going to say no. They're more likely to do a price reduction
Mhm.
of that amount than sell it and lock in their loss. So let's say it's $1 million, and you write so 5% on 1 million would be 990, 950. In the first week, the seller is not going to sell it for that much less. They're going to like I'd rather see if I can get 975 for it than go all the way down to 950.
Mhm.
They might counter you. It just
Mhm.
depends. But I think you go below 950, it starts looking like 925, like, oh, that offer's not serious. Like at 950, they'll probably engage you. But if you're below that, it's going to feel too much. And they're like,
Mhm.
oh, you're looking for too much of a bargain. I don't want to deal with somebody that's looking for a bargain. I want someone that's going to be a fair um, negotiating partner. And I think likewise, I tell sellers the same thing when you start talking about price reductions. If you're listed at 1 million and you haven't gotten an offer, you need to go down to 950 because if somebody was going to buy it at 975, they would have offered that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, good advice. I think preparing both buyers and sellers for what they might encounter out in the market is key, even before you go out and look at houses or even before you get the house on the market, because their mindsets are miles apart.
Yeah.
What the buyer wants right now, what the seller expects right now, two entirely different things.
Yeah. Well, I will say this about current real estate. It's very interesting. It's not easy, and it's taking us, all of our real estate professional knowledge and having long conversations about it with each other and with our colleagues and with other listing agents,
Yeah.
about what's going on out there. I think if there's ever a market when you really need an agent, it's something like it is right now
Yeah.
because of it being more of an even playing field. There's a lot of negotiating that happens in this space, and having somebody be your advocate and counselor to do it is more important. Like during the rage when everything was selling and somebody said, I don't need an agent to sell, I can just put a sign out in front. They weren't wrong. Uh,
Right.
Someone's going to throw money at it. Are there risks? And other than we have a conversation about that, but they weren't wrong. But in this market, you need to have a savvy real estate professional help you navigate it because it is not easy. There's a lot of negotiating that goes on, things like credits that happen, um, other terms that you might not even know are possible things to write into a contract that might make it easier for either a buyer or seller to accept something even if the dollar amount isn't the final word. So,
Yep. Yep. There you have it.
all right. Any other closing thoughts before we sign off?
And I'm glad I'm not in Paris today.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, if you found this at all helpful or entertaining, be sure to like and subscribe and refer us to your clients or your friends. Maybe they'd be our clients. Thanks for joining us this week. Dorothy was right. There's no place like home. Bye.